Hi, and welcome to an episode of the JetRails Podcast. This is Robert Rand, your host for the day, coming to you from sunny South Florida. It's been a few weeks since we posted our last episode. We've been having some great times at IRCE and other trade shows. We got to host the JetRails Bourbon Barbecue up at a great venue in Chicago, and really, thankful for clients and partners and friends in the industry that got to join us. Speaking of which, I got to catch up a little bit with a friend, George, one of the co-founders of ShipBob. And we've been talking a little bit about how merchants can compete with two-day shipping. Amazon's taught everyone that, that the products should be at your doorstep before the blink of an eye. And it's definitely caused some logistical issues around the e-commerce industry in recent years. So George has been kind enough to give us a little bit of his time today to tell us a little bit about it. George, would you mind introducing yourself?
Thanks for having me on, Robert. I'm George Wojciechowski. I'm co-founder of ShipBob. We've been in business 5 years. We came out of YC in the summer of 2014, and our goal has always been to give the new generation of e-commerce merchants the same tools, reach, and scalability as the bigger players in e-commerce.
And I've been waiting to ask you, and I never have before, but as a Robert, I've kind of wondered how the name ShipBob came about. There's a lot of shipping companies that use the word ship in the name, so you know exactly what industry you target, but where'd Bob come from?
Well, it's kind of a funny story. Initially, we wanted a different name when the company was starting out. It was Ship Tiger, but that URL was taken. And so we came up with a placeholder name for the time being initially, which was Bob. And we got so busy after a while that the name stuck. And in our early days, in our first iteration, back in 2014, the hot space was being in the Uber of. So, on-demand shipping, on-demand, house cleaning on demand. There was all sorts of startups that were on demand. And we were too in the initial phase where customers would take a picture of items that they would want shipped, and we would dispatch a courier to bring those items back to our office, where we would package it up and ship it out for them and charge them a pickup fee and the cost of postage. But what was happening in those days is that people weren't shipping cookies to grandma or letters or like small packages to their friends and family on a regular basis. What they did want shipped was awful stuff to package and pick up, like golf bags, TVs, artwork. And so we started telling clients that Bob stands for bend over backwards. So bend over backwards for you. And we literally were on a regular basis, in that we would be dispatched to go pick something up and would have to maneuver it down like 3 flights of stairs and into a car and then back to our office, where we would package it and then drive it over to FedEx or UPS or USPS.
Wow, the customer is always right.
Exactly.
Well, I had a feeling that there was going to be a good explanation. I didn't know it was going to be quite that good. That's amazing. I'm really glad I stumbled into that one. Let's talk a little bit about traditional e-commerce fulfillment. So, it sounds like in your history, you've gone through some iterations and, figured out that that there were use cases for businesses to sell items and then to have them transmitted, to have them delivered or couriered, that needed to be met. Certainly, as more and more of commerce in the United States goes into digital commerce and e-commerce, I know that most businesses have started out warehousing some of their own goods, or working with a more traditional footprint. What's your experience with some of that evolution, with where merchants perhaps have started their journey into warehousing and holding on to goods and fulfilling orders, and where it started to lead in the last few years?
Yeah, it's a great question. We were lucky enough to get in very early on the trend, in which platforms like BigCommerce, WooCommerce, Squarespace, Shopify were really able to democratize the ability to take an inspired idea and take that business online and start it up and have a cool website or whatever in a matter of a couple hours. And that technology kind of formed the thesis of why ShipBob was started. So like I said earlier, we started 5 years ago, and our goal as a company was always to provide the new generation of e-commerce merchants with the same tools, reach, and scalability as the bigger players in e-commerce. You and I and everyone knows that when you order something from Amazon or Nordstrom or Jet, Walmart, any of the bigger brands, you don't have to think twice about the cost of shipping because it's almost always free, and it almost always is going to arrive in a day or two. And that's because these companies can spend hundreds of millions of dollars and billions of dollars in their logistics infrastructure. Well, if I'm an e-commerce merchant with a Shopify store or a BigCommerce store, and I'm selling vegan handbags on the Lower East Side of Manhattan or homemade pomade in Austin, Texas, I'm at a distinct disadvantage compared to what the standard is in e-commerce, meaning I'm usually shipping from one singular location. If I'm not, I may be doing it myself when I'm starting off, or at some point down the road, I may use the local fulfillment center, but almost always it's location with large square footprint and low cost per square foot, and you're shipping from that location to all the different shipping zones around the country and around the world. So a lot of your shipments are not local; they're zone 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And how ShipBob addresses this problem is in two ways. One, we feel like we've built a great technology that allows e-commerce merchants to have a source of truth for all the goings on in the shipping and logistics part of their business. It integrates with a lot of, most of all the relevant e-commerce platforms out there. And secondly, we own and operate our fulfillment centers around the United States. So we have fulfillment centers in Chicago, at Los Angeles, San Francisco, Dallas, and now just recently opened up Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And that allows us to work with our merchants to distribute their inventory around the United States, and thus making the majority of the shipments the ones who choose to optimize their inventory around different locations. It allows them to basically have the majority of their shipments as zone 1 and zone 2 and arrive to their customers within a day or two. So it's providing a better customer experience for these merchants' customers, as well as lowering the cost of shipping for the majority of the shipments, because they're all very local, zone 1 or zone 2 the majority of the time.
Yeah. And how does a merchant figure out where they should, when you've got that logistical need, someone that's going from self-shipping or shipping from their retail locations in one region, or, some other more natural startup footprint in e-commerce, how do you figure out where their goods need to be? Because, you don't want to send a bunch of product to, let's say, San Francisco when it's really not going to move well in that region.
Yeah. This is where communication with merchants really, optimizes how we plan on how to distribute inventory. First and foremost, we'll look at the last 6 months of shipping data, and we'll evaluate with the merchant where their orders are going. And based on that information, we can make recommendations as to which FCs and what percentage of their inventory should be distributed to different regions. In addition, we'll have a conversation with the merchant about what they are planning in terms of their marketing, and if they're, focusing on, for example, like the Northeast of the United States or Canada during the winter months because they have a cold weather product, we'll take that into consideration as well. But normally the first go-to is to be able to evaluate the last 6 months of shipping data and then make a recommendation based on that, and then have the conversation and say, hey, what's coming down the pipeline for you? Are you doing anything unique in certain regions that we should know about? And then we'll come up with a recommendation to them on how to best distribute that inventory.
Interesting. So in the case of your team, you're connecting directly with their e-commerce platform, helping to really pick up the order for fulfillment. you're already helping them to figure out where those items should be warehoused in the network, so that they're already offering faster shipping at better prices. I imagine that your team, because you're such bulk shippers coming out of your fulfillment centers, that you're getting some discounted rates as well, that you might be able to pass on some savings.
Yeah,
Because
that's a really good
you're
point.
shipping on behalf of a lot of folks.
Yeah, so we've got over at this point 2,700 clients and around 30 countries around the world. So that does afford us to have great relationships with USPS, FedEx, DHL, UPS, and all the subsidiary services that they have. When a customer comes on board, we're able to look at their previous order history, the amount of volumes that they've been shipping out over the last 3 to 6 months, as well as what they plan for the future, and pass on a competitive shipping rate plan to them based on the amount of activity they've been doing and what they expect to do.
Very interesting. Obviously, Amazon has their own warehousing infrastructure, FBA, Fulfillment by Amazon. They, as most folks in the industry know, command a certain size, maybe not the same customer service as a team like yours, or I'm sure that there are other differentiators for customization and for unique things like kitting or dealing with wholesalers with EDI. What are some of those things that you run into that you think, while Amazon might be okay for for some needs, that would push a user to maybe a more personalized service like yours, or a more defined service?
Yeah, I think it all comes down to, are you building a brand or are you selling a commoditized product? At the end of the day, and Amazon is a very useful tool for thousands and hundreds of thousands of merchants around the world. But at the end of the day, when you're building a brand and you need things like custom unboxing experience, certain branding within the box, if you want to, most importantly, have a relationship with that customer and have your customer identify your product as something distinct and unique, when you're on a big marketplace, that's not afforded to you. More often than not, that email address when that order went through, you never get to see. So the customer buys your product on a large marketplace. That's that marketplace's order. It comes in that marketplace's box. And you have no relationship with that client for future sales. They would have to go through that marketplace, or they'll just have to remember your product. What we're finding out is that the most successful businesses are ones that have a unique branding that customers identify with. And the way to consistently build from that foundation is to have a relationship with the customer, to be able to have their email address, let them know what's going on with your product or any special offers and things like that. In addition, like I said earlier, having some unique collateral or marketing about how the package arrives, what it looks like, and what's inside. And brands having control over that and creating an image or a campaign based on their brand identity, I think is super important now more than ever for brands to distinguish themselves by utilizing things like that. But ultimately, I think for me personally, the most important thing is having that relationship and being able to capture that email address. So as your business grows, you're able to keep your customers informed of everything going on with your brand that you want them to know.
And it's interesting that in hosting, very much like some users might go to Amazon FBA, we certainly run into Amazon's AWS cloud hosting, and we happen to to provide service in that realm. In some cases, we get users that vehemently would rather be in our data centers than have us place them on AWS. That I guess at best, some merchants see Amazon as a frenemy, that it's someone that they feel compelled to interact with in order to provide for shoppers in order to be where they need to be when they need to be. But when you can get service elsewhere that's going to be more cost effective, more user friendly, better service, I don't think there's many departments in Amazon that are known for their service to the sellers, to the merchants, for going above and beyond. And I think that's where Amazon certainly leaves a lot of room for the rest of the market. And do you run into customers that maybe mix and match your service, your warehousing with drop shipping or with some of their own warehousing? Or do you normally come in as the be all end all, or are there those use cases where you're part of their logistics?
Yeah. So, going back to what we were just talking about with Amazon, Amazon and other marketplaces are a relevant avenue to sell your product and to, as an additional revenue channel. But if you're building a brand and a brand identity, you need to have that independent website, that independent opportunity to connect with your customer. I think nowadays, as businesses are growing, additional sales channels are more popular than ever, and it's not out of the ordinary for a merchant to have, for example, a big commerce store, and then also be selling on Amazon or Walmart or some other marketplaces in addition to their main store. I think that as businesses grow, these marketplaces present an opportunity to, have additional eyeballs. You can't argue with the fact that these marketplaces have millions of people looking at the products that, in different search categories when you type that into the search.
Absolutely. Amazon, for many shoppers, maybe more than I would choose, is the first place that they search for product. Yep. So, where there are still many users that search Google first, or they go to other places in, location, you have to be where the customer is in order to capture certain market share.
Yeah, and one of the things that personally that I like about marketplaces like Amazon or Walmart is that the review system is reliable. When I'm buying a product and I'm unfamiliar with it, I feel like one of the things that they do really well is to be able to give, you can read through reviews, and the reviews are usually pretty spot on. And so that's one advantage that marketplaces do have, that if you're just running a big commerce or WooCommerce store, people can look into your product, and there are places where to get reviews on the products that you're selling, but it doesn't compare to just like the mass amount of input that these marketplaces get.
Absolutely. Well, and just sometimes having enough reviews to look at, where one merchant may have a handful, but Amazon may have dozens or hundreds or thousands of reviews on a product. So
yeah, but
that aggregation.
Yeah, but it also comes down to how you want your product seen and viewed by the customers. Meaning that it may not be advantageous for you to have a product that's, for example, the vegan handbags that we were talking about earlier. It's great if you are you're selling them on your e-commerce store, but do you want that product being compared with 24 other potentially similar products, and merchants choosing the one that is $1.70 cheaper or something like that? A lot of merchants want to avoid that race to the bottom and want to create a unique identity that customers can identify with, versus just entering a marketplace where there's a lot of different products that are very similar, and oftentimes consumers just choose the one that is lowest priced.
Absolutely. And there are a lot of knockoffs that come pretty quickly. So if you hit a streak of success in Amazon, whether it's Amazon making the product or someone else that decides to just make a complete knockoff, even using some of your branding, it can be a real challenge to fight those kinds of inevitabilities. So when you are a brand, obviously selling directly through your own site, through some of your own channels, is always going to be the healthiest opportunity. And I know we've covered it a little bit in some of our earlier podcast episodes. And so in terms of the logistical side of that, so you might have a user that's selling in multiple sales channels that you're fulfilling for. And then are there cases where the orders get split? Some of it ships from your warehouses, some of it ships from maybe their retail locations or their warehouses, where they might have some purpose to split some of that?
Yeah, we don't see that as often where like an order comes in and perhaps the merchant is using their own retail store to ship out, one of the SKUs while another SKU comes from us. What does happen is if a SKU is diminished in one of the FCs, but an order comes in for a SKU that we do have inventory of, but we're out of inventory in a certain other SKU, it'll just get shipped from the nearest fulfillment center. But we don't see it very often where an order comes in and there's inventory in two different locations with two different distributors or fulfillment partners, or whether it's the merchant's own bricks and mortar location and us and them fulfilling the same order separately.
Because that probably brings up the price. Now you have to send out two shipments with two costs from whether it's UPS or FedEx or USPS or DHL or whatever.
Exactly, it definitely eats into margin.
Yeah.
What we do see is a lot of merchants who come on board with ShipBob and they have a lot of SKUs. But the 80-20 rule holds true, where 20% of the inventory is 80% of their revenue. So they'll store their top, 5 or 10 SKUs with us because they know the majority of their orders are those SKUs. And then the slower moving SKUs, they'll hold on to themselves. And when those orders come in, they might self-fulfill them because they come in once every couple of days or so. But the fast moving SKUs where you're seeing like hundreds or thousands of orders per day, they'll warehouse that with us within our fulfillment center network and charge us with getting those out to the customers.
Yeah, and drop shipping has been a big topic in recent years. That I know if there are items that I know if I order from Costco, they're not shipping from Costco. They're going to ship from the manufacturer, from the brand. It's going to whether it's EDI or some other method of moving data around. Back to that split order situation, something that comes up on occasion?
Yeah, it comes up on occasion. I think drop shipping is still fairly relevant, but I see that being kind of diminishing a little bit, only because of the reason that I think merchants more often than ever before are interested in creating brands, like we talked about earlier, with a unique identity, and are not as often selling commoditized products that is just trying to market something and capture the arbitrage thousands of times over. I feel like that space, personally, that formula has become very, very, very competitive, and it's not as profitable as it used to be. And so we're seeing merchants who do want to aspire to be e-commerce merchants and start their own business, not looking to that route as much as they did maybe in 2015, 2016, and are instead looking to create a brand.
I would tend to agree that even in message boards, places like Reddit, I see a lot of folks asking about drop shipping because they're trying to get into it. I think in some ways, they think it's easy. They don't have to put up a large investment in order to do it. But like you say, it's been done. It's become a little saturated. And in some ways, I think it may almost be like being an Amway or an Avon salesperson that you sign on. Maybe they have some good product, perhaps. I mean, that's up for debate, but that's true of just about anything. But now, where's the market? You're going to sell to friends, to family, you're going to sell through social media. There's lots of other people doing the same. So where does it end? I'm with you that building a brand is absolutely, where I think businesses that are going to stick and thrive for years, where the winners are going to be by the percentages. There's always going to be someone that figures out a good model for something like drop shipping, but
there was a sliver of time
where
it worked really, really, really well, and then all of a sudden it's like got super saturated. And I think consumers too are a little bit exhausted from products that they may view as like commoditized products. That people like to buy value and things that they personally identify with, and it's harder to do that when there's 300 different businesses selling the same tchotchke, all doing different marketing strategy on Facebook or something like that to essentially sell the same product, but there's really no identification or connection to what the brand is trying to identify, what consumers are identifying with about the brand.
Yeah, I mean, look, you want good brand affinity. You've got to stand out from the crowd. You have to be able to, in essence, tell a good story, make people feel like you're a reputable company to work with. You're an expert in your field. So there's content, there's, social good. There's all sorts of things that you can do in different brands, different businesses, obviously take different approaches and choose different things to pick off the list that's going to build that brand affinity. But I'm with you there. And, we've talked a lot about shipping. What happens when it comes time for returns? Because that's sort of the bane of most shipping and fulfillment operations, that, that's where things can get a little bit costly and, a little out of order.
Yeah, so I feel like that's the next frontier right now. There's a lot of exciting companies getting, venture-backed money to address the problem of returns. We've always had an internal solution. It's not the most perfect solution in the world, but it's been very functional and it's worked for last few years. Oftentimes, the way that returns will work is that customers will take a white labeled link from our dashboard, be able to put it on their BigCommerce or WooCommerce or Squarespace or Shopify store. And when customers need to return product, they can click on the link, type in their information, and it creates a PDF or return label on the spot. And then they have to print it out and then drop it off at a local post office or FedEx, UPS, whatever. That solution is fine, and then it goes to the nearest ShipBob fulfillment center to be processed. That solution is fine, but there's also a lot of innovation going on. We have a partner in a company called Returnly, which is one of the more exciting companies out there right now in regards to returns. They have a cool function which you want to return something from a merchant's website, they'll refund you the money immediately before even the product gets back to the fulfillment center, and thus allowing for less cart abandonment, meaning people take their $240 and instead of sending it back and waiting for the return to hit their credit card, they'll get refunded the money immediately, which will then allow them more often than not to go back to the same website and buy a product that they do want, or that may work better for them. There's also a really innovative company called Happy Returns, who we're really happy to work with. And they're doing something really cool in which they're creating kiosks in locations around the United States, college bookstores, department stores, things like that, where customers can very easily use their software, get a return label, and drop it off somewhere locally where the return will eventually be picked up and processed. So there's a lot of innovation going on in the field. We've got a solid solution at ShipBob, but we're also partnering with and keeping an eye out for other solutions that are moving the needle in terms of progress, how to make returns more optimized.
It's really interesting. I'm a partnership guy at heart, so I always, love to see when good technology comes together, good service providers come together. At the end of the day, it takes a village, and I think that any strong mid-size or enterprise e-commerce organization has run into that you can try to really keep as lean as possible when it comes to software and vendors and such, but if there's ROI to be had, if you can improve your processes, improve your bottom line, have happier customers. Honestly, it's all about how do we give a good user experience? How do we get the stuff out to them fast? How do we handle customer service effectively? I'm with you 100%.
And that's a really good point. One of the ways you can keep on top of that, and one of the things I'm super proud of that we do at ShipBob, we own our entire tech stack. We've built our WMS in the fulfillment centers. We've built our dashboard. Everything is vertically integrated. So that allows us to listen to what our merchants are telling us. Like, hey, when we hear something enough that merchants have a specific need or they'd like to see something, we're able to either one, build it out ourselves because we own the tech stack and we have the engineers to be able to add on an additional service. So that has been very useful to our merchants over the years. But as you said, create a partnership with somebody who's doing something innovative that maybe we don't want to build out or we don't want to own, and their services are very complementary to what we're doing. It's funny, like I come from the finance industry, and if you're a trader or a bond trader or something like that, you have a Bloomberg terminal, which is an end-all be-all to everything that you need to basically do your job function, have research, be up to date on news. There's nothing like that in e-commerce, and there really shouldn't be, but it stresses the importance, because there's nothing like that, to be able to rely on partnerships that are complementary to your product. There's a lot of talk about the term headless commerce, and I believe that's true. I think, doing something really specific in the supply chain or in the e-commerce value chain is a great benefit, and then creating partnerships that are complementary to what you're trying to achieve, I think is the way to go. There's no one source of truth for everything. I feel like finding the 3, 4, 5 different cogs in your value chain and integrating them is the way to go.
Yeah, I mean, we at JetRails, I just recently launched a partnership with BigCommerce, which a couple of years ago would have been surprising for a web host to partner with with a SaaS platform of that nature. But I always love unlikely alliances, and at the heart of it, their push into headless commerce, having worked with partners to create plugins, extensions that will connect their SaaS e-commerce platform with front-end systems like WordPress or Drupal, gives us a great way to support their users, especially those that need more customization, that need more flexibility, that the benefit from those kind of headless applications. I know that at Shopify Unite, there were some good conversations around GraphQL and headless. Certainly Magento's releases, even we do a lot of work with Magento at JetRails, but they've done a lot to allow users to go headless. That we're definitely seeing that trend in the industry. And at the same time, we also from time to time run into folks that, for instance, they've written apps for these systems like Shopify and BigCommerce, and those need to be hosted somewhere. So, our mission critical hosting, our white glove service starts to stand out, because if there's any blip on the radar with those apps, those sites are negatively impacted, right? That they don't, that your e-commerce site might be a brick because your custom app or your, the app that you got out of an app store isn't really hosted in an environment that's being well monitored and maintained.
That's correct.
So we've run into these interesting things in the industry where it's not what you'd expect, but companies need to come together around solutions, around the end user, both the merchant and the shoppers, and what's going to work best, what's going to, get through the entire process. So always really interesting looking at all that optimism.
Always interesting and always evolving. And that's what's interesting. There's new ideas coming into the marketplace of ideas almost on a weekly basis. So it's an exciting time.
Yeah. And with that, I hope you'll come back on at some point in the future and we can look at some new innovations and changes, because we know they come down the pike real fast.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me and share some information with our listeners today. Any final thoughts?
No, it's always great to talk with you. We always have great, wide-ranging and candid discussions, and I'm happy to do it anytime, either on a podcast or in person, and continue our partnership and relationship going forward.
Awesome. Well, to our listeners, we really appreciate you tuning in for another episode. Feel free to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. We're in dozens of podcast networks. We will have videos up as well from this particular episode, and feel free to follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, whatever your favorite social media is, to stay tuned for new episodes. We've got a bunch that are going to be coming out over the next few weeks. And we love comments. We love your feedback. So if you've got ideas, if you've got a great guest for us, or something that you think we can add to our notes or our episodes, by all means, we love to hear from you. Thanks, and happy selling.
Thank you, Robert.